Hey, what's going on, everyone? We're back with another episode of Dr. Diaries, where we interview various different medical professionals for those of us who are curious or for pre-health students like myself. Today, we're joined by student Dr. Zaamin Khawja, who is currently attending Midwestern University of Osteopathic Medicine. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me here.
Of course. Cool, let's jump right into it.
Yeah,
Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into medicine? When did it start and all the different obstacles that came your way?
absolutely. So I'd say I'm lucky in that I have multiple doctors in my family, including my father. I have some uncles, aunts, grandparents even. So I'm not a first gen, not even a second gen. I would be a third generation. So I've been exposed to having doctors in the family. But there was never, you know, there was never influence. I was never pressured into going into it. Actually, it's funny. While I was applying to medical school, it was my own dad who was like, "Are you sure this is what you want to do? Like, you can do whatever you want." So I'd say the first real exposure I had to medicine outside, having families of doctors was, so in high school I was, playing multiple sports. I dislocated my knee. It was a pretty bad injury. I was in the hospital, needed 3 surgeries in 2 weeks at the time. And so, that gave me my first real exposure into what surgeons do, what it's like being a patient in a hospital. I was there for 2 weeks. But when I was in the ER, I was, on morphine, in pain, sitting there. I was like, this is the worst thing that could possibly be happening to me right now. And I remember hearing this woman's yell a few beds away, and my mom was with me. She went to check it out and see what was going on, and she came back after a little while, and I was like, oh, what happened there? What's going on? I know I'm not the only person here. And it actually, her 4 or 5 year old son had drowned, and I think he passed away just a few, maybe 10, 20 feet away from me. And I was confused at the time, because I was like, why couldn't they save him, right? You grow up thinking, oh, doctors save people, and there's a reality to it, which is, not everyone can be saved. And this was the first time, which it wasn't, I didn't experience the death of the child, but I was like, oh, there's so much that can be going on at one time. I'm here, I just had a dislocated knee that they put back in, and I'm in a lot of pain, thinking this is the worst that could happen. But, a child passed away. And that was the first time I was really like, doctors can do everything that they can do, and it still may not be the best. You won't get the best outcome. And that didn't really push me away from medicine. That it made me more curious. And I was like, what is possible? What are all the things you could do to actually help someone? And in my journey through recovering from that injury, I've had 5 surgeries total. Worked with lots of different medical teams. I've shadowed some of the doctors, some of the surgeons that did my own surgery. I shadowed them, and seeing the difference you can make in someone's life, that really spoke to me. Because when you're a patient in any that could require anything, you could be a orthopedic patient, you could be a cardiac patient, a GI patient. You're seeing someone who, you're there as a last resort, right? No one wants to see the doctor, but you're miserable, you're not having a good time. That's why you're seeing a doctor. And in that moment, that doctor is the difference between a positive and a negative outcome. And I think that really spoke to me, and that's what made me really want to explore medicine. I find, and throughout high school, I always liked biology, especially the human body. I think the body is really cool. I think anyone you ask in medicine enjoys learning about the body to an extent, and I think I think engineers will also appreciate that there's so much that our body does that once you're learning about it, you're like, wow, it's kind of a miracle that worse hasn't happened. With everything that can go wrong, everything that your body regulates, it's pretty amazing. So that's that furthered my passion into medicine. So I was in undergrad, and when I was in undergrad, I worked at a sports medicine internship program. First of all, I was majoring in physiological sciences. So basically biomechanics, kinesiology, human biology, more of that. And I'd say it's along the lines of a typical pre-med major. So doing all my prerequisites for that. I was in a sports medicine internship program, so we work with like the sports teams, with the athletic trainers, PTs, doctors. I was interested into physical therapy for a while because I really liked athletics, and after I got hurt, that ended my athletic career. I was like, oh, physical therapy, you can work a lot with athletes, but it didn't have the satisfaction in terms of longevity. And by the end of when I had to really think of applying to either PT, physical therapy, or medical school, that's when I was like, I might like this for 5 to 10 years, but I wouldn't enjoy this being, my career. And I wanted to make more of a difference, than not saying that physical therapists don't make a huge difference. I think, they are significantly involved in any hospitalized patients' outcomes, any people with any sort of injuries. But I wanted to be leading the change, and basically creating a definitive outcome for someone. So that's when I decided. I was like, medicine is one of those things for me that I can really, truly make a definitive difference for someone. I want to be the one that's in charge of a team, calling the shots, making decisions. I don't want to be, and it's a personal thing, I don't want to be really taking orders from someone and doing what someone else wants. I want to be the one that's recommending things. I love to work as a like in a team. So I was like, you get to be a doctor and you're leading a whole team and calling the shots, and you have to be respected. There's a difference between, and from what I've seen being in medical school, there's a big difference between teams that really respect the doctor that they work with versus ones that don't like their doctor. And I think seeing the ones that people like, I'm like, I want to be like that. So in undergrad, doing all the prereqs that are needed for pre-med, I realized that you don't have to do the conventional pathway to get there. I had a lot of friends who were like psychology majors, some were neuroscience, a few engineering. A few friends were non-science majors doing the pre-med path, like philosophy, Spanish, anthropology. It's pre-med, I think, just refers to what you need to do to get to medical school, and it's just a checklist of certain classes that they require. But you can actually do whatever you want to get there. There's a friend of mine who his younger brother is doing computer science as a pre-med, and I think that's great. I think that really makes you stand out because you're doing what you're passionate about. I chose the more conventional approach, and so I graduated right around the time COVID started. So it started around March 2020, and then I was set to graduate in June. So there were a lot of things unsure about, like MCAT, the application cycle. So I decided I wouldn't apply right away, even though I was studying for the MCAT. So I took that initial period, moved back home, studied for the MCAT after graduating until December of 2020. So I took a few months to kind of get everything together, figure out what I'm going to do in my gap year. I did the MCAT twice. So I did it in December and then again in the end of March. So right before the application cycle for the next cycle opened up. And in that time, I was working as a medical assistant. So in my gap years, I took 2 gap years. So I was working as a medical assistant for a year and a half before starting med school in 2022. And there are certain changes I would have made in hindsight, but I'm still happy with the overall path that I took to get to medical school.
Yeah. Going back in time, for those who are studying to take the MCAT or planning to take it or even retake it, all of the knowledge that you have, your new study methods after being in medical school, what would you do differently now?
So I'm not the best standardized test taker, and if you are, I think that's amazing. But it's questions. At the end of the day, you just have to log in as many questions as you can get, because especially with the MCAT, it's about pattern recognition. It's what's this question asking me, and the more you can do, to basically figure out what some question is asking me, the easier that those answers will come. You'll know, oh, I can eliminate these answers, because content, you would like to assume that you've done all the things you can do for content revision, But watching videos, reading books will only get you so far. You have to know how to answer the questions. So the way I did my second MCAT, which helped a lot, was I set a 3-month schedule, and I stuck to that. I'd say scheduling out your study routine is pretty important. Know what you're going to do day to day, and include breaks. Don't be studying from like 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. straight. Have some breaks there. Have some 1 to 2 break days in a week. But just know that and I was lucky because I had graduated, so I didn't have much to do besides work. So I could spend the time to do that. If you're in undergraduate, and you're studying for it, you'll have to adjust the schedule. You may need more time to do the same thing. But I was able to study all day, pretty much every day. But I did 6 weeks of content review. So just, there's a diagnostic test which just shows you where you're at the beginning. What are your weak topics? I focused more on those weak areas. There's so many different resources out there. There's no one that's the best. Like I used Kaplan. I think they're really popular, really good. I used their like subject textbooks, and I would focus on certain chapters each day for the first 6 weeks and try to basically make it through all the subject books. And then the next 6 weeks it was just questions, pretty much all day, every day, different sections. My worst was CARS, so the reading comprehension, which I'd say everyone, 90% of people find it tough. And then the Chem Phys section. So I would be, focusing more on those in terms of volume, but just questions, reviewing the questions in depth. Don't just look at an answer and say like, oh, this is this answer next. It's, it's weak for a reason. So why am I thinking about this answer when it's actually this? So figuring out what your thinking method is and correcting that, I'd say that helped me a lot on the second time I did it. Yeah, I'd say questions at the end of the day. If you can get as many as you can done, you'll figure out the patterns. That'll also teach you because you're actively learning while doing it. So, you're looking at all the different content through the questions. Anki, I was never big on until medical school. I know some people really like it for studying for the MCAT, and I wouldn't advise against it. I think if you've used things like flashcards and stuff in undergrad and it works and you like it, try it. I didn't know how it worked too much. I didn't use that in undergrad, so I didn't use it until med school. I have friends who used Anki for the MCAT and they loved it, so try it, early on. You can try it more for content review.
Yeah. I really like what you said, that it's weak for a reason. So you should really focus on why you're getting those questions wrong, not just like passive learning through them. And the stress and anxiety of applying can be so much. What's the most important thing to focus on? There's GPA, there's the MCAT score, extracurriculars.
So it's tough because there's so many applicants nowadays that you're going up against a lot of people who are also excellent. And I'll be very frank. I like to think I was a very average applicant. I didn't have a crazy good GPA. In undergrad, I think I barely had a 3.5 GPA. My MCAT was 5.11, good. That was my second one. Good, but not, crazy good. I had a C plus, I had a few B's, and then the rest were A minuses to A's. So, it's not gonna be the end of the world if you don't do well on a class, but GPA matters, right? Because at the end of the day, they wanna see, can you handle the medical school curriculum? So if you do well in undergrad, it just helps you. And I'd say in hindsight, I would have chosen a different major. I would have, you don't have to choose the hardest thing. You should choose something that you like enough to do throughout undergrad, but there was this one major that several people did called psychobio. It was like a psychology, biology blend, but I don't want to say it was easy, but it was much easier than physiology, and lots of my friends who did it, who were pre-med, pretty much got 4.0s, and they're all in great med schools. And I don't think a medical school cares what you do. They'll look at the number, they won't see, oh, you did, biology, because how many thousands of people, tens of thousands of pre-meds do biology. They'll look at the number, so GPA matters, MCAT matters, and schools have an average for a reason. So suppose the cutoff is 512. If you get a 510, 509, it's not the end of the world. The average means that there are students who have those scores. But if you're, 502, 503, maybe reevaluate things. And there are schools that have a range of MCAT scores. So if you have a school that you really want to go to and you're working towards it, that it matters. Average GPAs, average MCATs matter for those places, for most places. So I'd say set yourself up for success in that sense. And there are lots of things, like they have special master's programs, postbacks. If you really don't do well in certain subjects, they have opportunities to make up those scores. There are lots of master's programs. Midwestern has one. There are lots of East Coast schools that have some around like the Midwest and Northeast, where it's like a GPA. I don't want to say booster, but it's a program you can do which mirrors a medical school curriculum, where if you can do well in that, you're almost guaranteed into at least their med school, if you can have like an A average. So there are opportunities, but it's, if you don't have the strongest GPA, you want to shoot for a really high MCAT. And you'll see that. You'll watch YouTube videos, you'll watch interviews. Reddit will have different answers. I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's definitely two of the more important things. But it's if they're low, it's not the end of the world. Don't give up on med school just because you have a really low GPA or MCAT score. There are ways like master's programs to help, but it might just take longer than someone who has a 3.8, 5.15 MCAT.
Yeah. If a student feels too average for medicine, what would you tell them?
I would say, I don't think there's such a thing as being average for medicine in terms of, I feel like I was a very average applicant. I wasn't exceeding lots of these thresholds that they had for, medical school requirements. Even in medical school, I'm not, I was getting a lot of the times the average exam score, like right around that level. I don't think that's going to make me worse of a doctor than the people that did better. And I don't think anyone who, did lower on some exams are going to be worse doctors because of that. And I think when you're in pre-med and in med school, I think it's important to realize that, these exams are one aspect of what it takes, but the exam doesn't make you a good doctor. It just helps you, get to a good residency program, So if you, not just that's what matters, right? It's important to do well in the exams. You have to pass, you have to get good grades, but it's not what makes you good at practicing. So it's being average isn't a bad thing, because you're average in medical school. You're doing something it's one of the hardest pathways you can take, but you're still doing it. You're not failing, right? You're doing well. And I think that leads a little bit into like imposter syndrome, where lots of students will question, do I have what it takes to be here? And I think you getting into medical school answered that question. These, admissions advisors will see and interview thousands and thousands and thousands of kids, and you had what it takes in their eyes to be in medical school. So what you have to prove to yourself is, you have what it takes to get out there and be a really good doctor. It's the whole, it's your personal statement. It's your personal statement is you telling medical school admissions committees, this is why I'm going to be a good doctor. And you have to, make that come true. It's the grades and everything else in between. It's going to be hard. You might have some ups and downs. You might have more downs than ups, but you're there and you're doing what you need to do. And if you're putting in your most, if you're trying your best, essentially. And if you're not, that's a different thing. But if you're trying your best, and you're not getting the outcomes you want, ask for help. It's not like undergrad where, someone may reach out to you after not doing well in an exam. You should ask, a professor or a faculty, how can I do better? and people are there to help you, but you have to find the help. But you're not alone. I think everyone in medical school thinks it's hard. I think very few people will tell you, oh, this is easy. It's tough, but you're there because someone, people thought that you're meant to be there, and you just have to tell yourself and believe in that.
And being in medical school, not every exam is going to go well. Some students might even fail a few exams, and they might even ask themselves, do I really belong here? So what advice would you give to someone in that position?
It's, you know, look at the grand scheme of everything. If you fail an exam, I'll be honest, there was one that so each block has 4 to 5 exams, and there was one that I failed by like 1%. So it's like less than 1 point on the actual exam. In the moment I'm thinking, oh, this is the end of the world, this is the worst thing ever, and I'm waiting to be contacted by someone, and no one contacts me, and I think I went to the office hours because I'd studied a lot for it, and I was really disappointed. I was like, what the heck happened? And then the professor was like, oh yeah, I saw that, like, you're just gonna have to do a little better on the next one. And I think it's usually self-inflicted doubt. It's, unless you really are bombing every single exam in a course, you'll have some slip-ups. You may have no slip-ups. You might do less than what you wanted in, a certain subject. After you studied for so long, you might get like, a 78% instead of a 90. But there'll be times, and it happened to me, where I thought I failed an exam and I did really well and I did above average. And you just have to keep going. Unless there's a pattern and something that's going wrong, you have to realize that, like, people in med school, like the admin, the faculty, the professors, they want you to succeed. So if there's a deficit, you have to find the help. You can't just, stay silent. But, I think in that course I ended up getting a B plus, and that exam was the one thing that just brought it down a little bit. And it turned out fine. No one contacted me saying that you're going to get expelled or you're like at risk of failing the course. And, things happen, and, you kind of set your own expectations. If you know you're doing the best you can do at all times, and of course it's hard because life happens. You might be sick. You might get hurt doing something. You might just, it's a very mentally taxing time, and maybe you're just not mentally there. That's okay. It's not the end of the world. But I'd say the biggest thing is to just keep trying and keep moving forward, and don't dwell on an individual failure. Learn from, what went wrong, what didn't I do right, how can I study better? Pick yourself up and keep going. You can't really feel bad for yourself. You have to kind of you have to have like a lot of grit and move forward. And, I'm not saying that with insensitivity. It's hard, but you can't let yourself fall behind too much. You have to kind of understand that, failure, how do you learn from failure, right? If no one failed, no doctor in the world would have a patient die,
Yeah.
It's like there are things that you can do better, and sometimes you can do everything that you could do and it just won't go right, and that's okay.
And you mentioned finding help and reaching out to those who are there to help you a lot. Was there one person that really like mentored you in specific?
In med school, I'd say your upperclassmen are, if you're really lucky like I was, you'll be in touch with upperclassmen, and I knew several people in the year above me, and they would always give me advice of like, oh, like this professor likes to test on these things, or like, oh, hey, like make sure you like know this for this exam, and like things like that just help, right? And they'll give their advice from what worked, because think about it, they're the best people for it because they were in your shoes a year ago. But also everyone's not built the same. So like, I had certain people give me advice of like, oh, to study, just copy down the slides note for note and just do that a bunch of times. And other people told me to do Anking, and different things will work, and I tried what I tried when it worked, but when it didn't, I would ask for help. There was, one of my friends who told me how he studied for stuff that, he was one of like the last guys I went to, and his thing worked for me. And I started doing like very well after that. And it's not, I tried maybe 3 or 4 different things before that where I was like putting a lot more effort into it. And I was like, I'd do one exam and I'd maybe get the average score, and I'd put like twice the time and do barely better. So I'm like, how can I, what's that next step up? So, even faculty will sometimes like go, if you like, there are certain professors where all you have to do is go see them, and they'll pretty much tell you how to study. And like, they're not going to say that to lie. They're going to tell you what exactly to study, what question types to study for, and that's what the test was, because they write it. So, like the MCAT though, if you have the chance, questions, they're the best things you can do for practice. For step 1, step 2, in-house tests, if you have past questions, they're the best. They really help. That's my advice. Even for the MCAT, just get as many questions as you can in.
And when applying to med school, do you have any interesting stories? I know they ask a bunch of interesting questions in those interviews.
There's like the classic one is like, what kitchen appliance would you be? And I can't remember what I said. I think I said I would be like a mixer, because I like bring people together. And it's, I think they just want to see how are you thinking on your feet. I have a friend who said, like based on environmental issues in your state, what superpower would you have to fix it? Which I think that was crazy. I've never heard of that. They're from California, water shortage, so they would be like they described essentially like Aquaman-esque superhero, something like that. I got some ethical questions about like, you're at a clinic with a parent who doesn't want to vaccinate their kid, but your office has a vaccination policy. What would you do in that situation? They love to ask you see your classmate cheating or fabricating lab results, something like that. What do you do? I think they just want to see what's your way of thinking, and are you going to say the right thing, essentially. But I'd say those two, let's see, they want to get to know you. In the interview, they want to get to know you. So, they'll ask about interests and things that you have. The weird questions, I don't know a bunch, besides those two, I haven't heard of a ton, but I know they're out there. I think it's just the interviewer will just come up with something, and they want to see how do you think on the spot.
Yeah. And what was your reaction getting into medical school, finally getting those acceptance letters?
I think I was so it was funny. It was, when you get into undergrad, you get that like there's those there's like the schools app or something. It's like those invite apps that it's a forum, it's like a Discord for like new undergrads for everyone in the class. So I think I got that before I got the email from the school. So it was like, welcome to Midwestern, like download this app and you can meet people in your class. Or it was like a group me link, and I was like, what is this? And then 5 minutes later, I got the acceptance letter, and I think I was just so tired by the end of it, and just so like, the stress had built up, and then it was just period of waiting, and I was really excited. I think in the moment, my mom and dad, they were like in their bed in the morning, and I just kind of walked into their room, and I was like, I think I got into medical school, and they were like excited and happy, and I was like, I'm tired, like let's just go get some lunch. Like, it was a little unreal though. It was I want to say it's like the weight lifted off the shoulder. Like I feel like my shoulders just relaxed for a moment. I think it's probably, it's one of the best feelings you'll have getting in, and you'll feel a lot of internal relief, because everyone says, once you get in, that's like what matters, getting in. You'll hear so many people, it's like, you just have to get in, and you hear that so often, and you'll go through all the, the whole process of applying and doing everything that's needed of you. And it's, once you find out, it's very emotional, even if you're not expressive, maybe subconsciously. You should be proud of yourself for getting in, because at the end of the day, you know, someone thought that you over thousands of other applicants, you know, would be suited at being a doctor. So I think it's a very, you know, if you're not an expressive person, you'll still feel it. You know, you'll feel such a relief and excitement and happiness. It's a little unreal. It's, you know, it's, I don't want to say it's not the same like getting into undergrad where it's, you know, it's you people apply with like safety schools, reach schools, target schools, hopeful schools, but you know, a lot of people know that they'll get in somewhere. With med school, because of the sheer amount of applicants it gets, it's a gamble. So it's, you know, it's very much, you know, be proud of yourself for getting into med school. It's a big deal.
Definitely. And starting in medical school, how big of a change was that?
Oh, it was unreal. I'd say the first couple weeks of medical school, we probably covered everything in undergrad that we had learned. It was the volume. It's not that anything, and this is something that, you know, I've said to even friends when we're talking about it. I don't think it's the hardest thing to do in terms of content. I think it's how much is being thrown at you, which is what makes it difficult. Like, you know, if you space out everything that you learn in the first couple years of med school, like someone could comfortably do it in, you know, 3 to 4 years, which is essentially, you know, like what like a major is, like an undergrad. But that compressing everything into those first 2 years of didactics, for some programs it's like 1 to 1.5 years. I think that's what makes it difficult. And have you heard the drinking water like out of a fire hydrant? Like that's the analogy that they give. I don't think it's like that, because it's not impossible. No one can drink water out of a fire hydrant. I think it's like eating 10,000 calories every single day. You know, you could probably do it for the first couple days. I think Michael Phelps, right? When he was at the peak of his career, he was eating 10, and I looked it up like once in the past, and he'd eat like a dozen eggs plus like some sandwiches and pancakes for breakfast. Then he'd have like a pound of pasta for lunch and like another couple sandwiches and like a protein shake. And for dinner, he'd have another pound of pasta and like a whole large pizza and another few shakes. Like, imagine that volume every day. You could probably do it for a while, but you'd get really, you know, it gets to you. And if you say, okay, I'm gonna like skip this, you know, I'll skip this many calories, I'll skip studying. You're gonna have to do it eventually, and it's gonna come back to you. And you get thrown into it because you're adults, right? It's a doctorate program. You're an adult. There's no hand holding. Whereas in undergrad, you can get a lot more guidance. You have to do everything yourself. So I'd say the volume was the biggest adjustment first. You know, you're just figuring yourself out in the beginning. Like, how do I apply the same study styles that I used in undergrad for med school? And a lot of the time, you had to change things. You know, you had to adapt to it. But I wouldn't say it's impossible. It's just hard. It's very hard.
And at Midwestern University, what was your schedule like? How many lectures did you have a day? What was the exam schedule like?
Yeah, so at my university, it was two subjects a day, and it was like 2 3-hour lectures with like little breaks in between. So like 6 hours of lectures per day throughout the whole week. In DO schools, we do osteopathic labs. So we do osteopathic manipulative medicine, OMM. So that was like a 2-hour, I think 1.5 to 2 hour lab once a week, in addition to the subjects we're learning. So our lectures are recorded, so we have visual and audio for most of them. And like the professors, the doctors will always recommend to come to lectures. That number of students who stay in lectures goes down and down because, you know, you could probably do more at home. And I'm not saying to do that outright. You know, some professors, like, you can tell a good professor because the whole class is showing up for them, versus you still, you know, in medical school, you'll get the ones that aren't the best teachers. You know, they're reading off the slides, and you should know when to kind of study at home where you can get more done and you're not zoning out for 3 hours in a day, versus, you know, if you're showing up to a lecture, is it worth your time, right? If you're going to go to 6 hours to 8 hours of lecture in a day, are you going to absorb any of that, or is your time better served doing things more actively on your own and watching the lecture afterwards? Which my study style depended on the lecturer. There are some professors I would go for, and I could stay attentive for the whole 3 hours, and there were others where I would do a preliminary skim of the slides and look over the content, and then once they release the lecture, I'll re-listen and consolidate the information that way. So it's a lot, and I think it depends school to school. I don't know if every school is going to have 2-3 hour chunks. They might have less or more. That's something important to definitely look at when you're applying is, what's the curriculum of the medical school. Ours was the traditional curriculum, which it's in the first year you did biochemistry, anatomy, I think microbiology, and then like osteopathic medicine, and then the second year you do more like pathology, I think like immunology and those types of courses, so more targeted towards what you learned in the first year. Some medical school curriculums will do systems based, where it's like cardiology, everything. So anatomy, pathophysiology, microbiology for the heart, and then they'll do like respiratory, so like everything for the lungs. So that, some people prefer those different systems. Midwestern is a letter grade based school, so it's at the end of the day, it's still technically pass fail, but we get letter grades, and a lot of medical schools are pass fail. So you'll get like your percentile in the class, but for the tests, you either just pass or fail them. So that's something to look at also when you're applying is, if you are making your list of all the medical schools to apply to, just, it might be worth knowing for hopefully if you have the option, between 2 to 3 schools. Oh, are they pass fail, letter grade? What's their curriculum like? Those are things to consider in addition to just what the name of the school is.
Mm-hmm. How do you handle taking all that new information in and just retaining it until the exam date?
It's hard. It's at a certain point your brain becomes so saturated, you just have to trust that if you're putting in the right amount of effort, you're gonna know it. It's about, is it in there or not? So there were times where you're seeing so many different pieces of information from different lectures, and we could have slide decks for a single exam that were like 500 slides of information, and it comes down to like, oh, maybe they ask something in the test question that's like, a buzzword to something, and I may not know everything, but I may know that, oh, this question is asking about this because of like this one word, and this needs to be the answer. And it's a lot of, active recall is a little hard because you're learning so much. So if someone like were to ask me something in the moment about, some disease, maybe I could give certain bits of information, but if they maybe asked like, oh, like there was this marker for this type of cancer, I'd probably be able to say yes or no. So it's a lot of, I think it's a skill for people that can actively recall everything that they're learning, if you ask them about things. And it's about, how are you studying also. Some study methods are better than others. Some students can recall more than others. I'd say don't compare yourself, I think, I had to make a lot of adjustments to the way I studied throughout different courses. Different professors would teach, in different ways for the same subjects. But just knowing you're putting the effort in, you'll know if it's working or not. You will do something that works for a certain exam, and if it doesn't, you might have to change things up. So it's a constant adjustment. And sometimes you'll find something that works and you can use it for a long time, and that's good. But it's overwhelming, but like you're not alone. Mm-hmm. It's if I think that's a lot of people get stressed and they think, oh, I'm not smart because I can't remember, or this is hard. It's like medical school is hard. I think you should know that you're getting into something. It's one of the hardest pathways for a reason. You have to learn everything about everything all different systems in 2 years essentially, it's going to be hard, but that's okay. You know, just like acknowledge that it's tough and it might suck at times, but you'll make it through if you put the effort for it.
How do you stay grounded in being who you are outside of studying and outside of being a medical student?
I think not losing, don't lose what your passions are and who you are. You know, you'll make a lot of sacrifices with the time that you're putting into studying, but at the same time, you can make time for things that you like. I like to be active and do things, especially when the weather is fine. I like to be outdoors. So, you know, if that means that, you know, I would like actually schedule a time to go to the gym, you know, don't not do that because you think, oh, I can study for an extra hour. But like if you're on hour 10 of studying for the day and you're burnt and you're doing it just to do it, to feel like you're not gonna be productive, you know, take the break, do the activity you like. I have friends that would, you know, they're, you know, run clubs in med school. We had a run club. We had a, you know, a dance club. I think lots of med schools have these clubs for those passions that you like. You know, for me, it was like working out, doing some intramural sports. Like med schools, some of them have IM sports teams, and we were lucky that we had a bunch. We had, you know, basketball, softball, soccer, beach volleyball for all the different colleges in Midwestern, and it was like a fun outlet, right? And it's a couple hours of the day where you can just do something totally different and forget about anything. And a lot of the time you'll see those same people that were like, you're playing a volleyball match against someone and you'll be in the library a few hours later, you know, doing things like that. But you have to make the time to give yourself a break. You know, you can't force yourself. It's not sustainable. You can do it. You can study 24/7, but you can't do it forever, right? So you have to, I'm a big foodie. I love exploring all these different restaurants everywhere, and I would, you know, make plans with friends like every 2 weeks or so. Let's try a new restaurant somewhere in the Phoenix, right? A lot of people aren't from here. So I'd say, oh, like let's go out and let's do something, and then we'd like walk around the area, and it's a good break. You know, you feel like you have something to work towards as a break instead of just like when I have the time, I'm gonna do this. So it's definitely like you have to be conscious about, you know, doing that. I have friends who liked, you know, I'm trying to think of other hobbies and other things. Like art. Some friends like art, like painting and stuff like that. And they would meet up together and they would just do that for a while, right? There's a friend of mine who's a DJ in our school, and he would make the effort to still, you know, go to events and do that because that's who he is. You know, you're not just a medical student, you're someone with interests and passions. So at least, you know, you may not do it as much as before, but definitely try to keep some of it in your life.
Yeah. One thing I did want to ask you about was, in medical school, toxic competition can come up a lot. Is that something that you experienced?
No, actually. Maybe it's unique to our class. There are people you may not get along with, which I think is anywhere, right? Like you have your group of friends, people will have their groups of friends. I haven't noticed the whole toxic culture outright personally, and I haven't. There's some people I've spoken to who maybe they'll have an interaction with someone that, you know, wasn't great, but I haven't heard of like sabotaging people or things like that. Or you'll hear the term gunners a lot in medical school, and those are, you know, the people that will, I'd say, they're less inclined to help, and you know, they're the kind of like heads in the books all the time, doing what they need to do to get where they want to be. I don't think it's always at the cost of others. It may just be that, you know, they're not the best team player. You know, it may be that, you know, if you get them in a group project, maybe it won't be as smooth as if you were with your friends, for example. But I haven't personally experienced a lot of like toxic culture or toxicity. Maybe that's unique to my class. Maybe, you know, I'd like to hope that that's pretty prevalent. I know people in lots of other med schools everywhere, and I don't think any of them have experienced toxicity. You know, it might be interactions they don't like versus like people actually out to, you know, jeopardize your pathway. I don't think that's as prevalent as one may think.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Next, I want to ask you about the step 1 exam.
Okay.
What was that like for you?
Step 1, I'd say it sucks as much as the MCAT, but because it's things that you're actually passionate about and you're there doing what you want to do and learn about, it's better in that sense, content-wise. It's still a beast of an exam. You know, it's everything you learn in the first 2 years. So all the pharmacology, pathology, you know, basic sciences, some biochemistry, microbiology. You know, they'll ask questions that are like, here, they'll describe a whole disease and be like, what type of DNA is the causative organism? And you have to know if it's like a single-stranded, double-stranded, or mRNA. You know, is it a virus, bacteria? And it's information like that to where they'll give you just a picture of an x-ray and be like, what gene causes this? Or, you know, they'll describe a disease and be like, what lung disease is this? What heart disease? So it's a lot of information. There's a lot of pressure. It's pass fail, and that's gotten mixed responses from like older doctors. I don't want to say older in age, more chronologically, time-wise. It used to be scored, and some people think that it helped when it was scored because then step 2 had, you know, more of a buffer versus now if it's pass fail, you know, most people pass on the first try. I'd like to think a majority of people pass on the first try, meaning step 2 then, which is after your 3rd year, has a much higher, you know, weight to it. So it's tough, but everyone does it. Everyone's able to do it. You might just need a little bit more time, you know, than the allocated period, but everyone does it. It's fine. It's more fun to study for than the MCAT, for sure, because it's like, oh, it's like actual things that I'm interested in versus, you know, physics and chemistry and biology at a very basic level. So, yeah.
And the thing that everybody likes to hear about, how were your rotations?
Oh, I had a good time. I got really lucky for the most part with the preceptors I was with. A lot of them liked to teach, were not super toxic. There were, you know, certain ones that definitely enjoyed to see the med students squirm, but I got lucky, and a lot of them were like really good at teaching, guiding. I had a lot of experiences. I think when you enter your rotations, it's really your time to see how much you know. And you have to understand, when you first start, you know, you've learned everything in textbooks, and not everything is always textbook. So it takes a bit of time to adjust to it. And you're seeing patients in a professional capacity now. It's not these, you know, simulated patients in the first couple years. They're not just these like list of symptoms, you know, because not everyone will have like A through E. Some people might have a couple and still have the same, you know, disease process. And that's where, you know, your knowledge is being tested, but also your ability to communicate is being tested. Because after all, like being a doctor isn't just recalling facts, right? Like there's like a patient is a person, and that's who you're trying to treat. So you're getting your own personal checklist of information from someone that matches your level of knowledge. So maybe when I'm talking to some patient, you know, as a 3rd year student, I'm excited because I'm like, oh, I'm finally figuring this out. And maybe there's like 10 things that I'm looking for. And the doctor, just through 30 years of experience, he probably has like 50 things that he can get in the same interaction time that I can get. So don't think you're, you know, unable to be there once you get there. It's experience, right? Like this is your first time actually being like learning as much as you learn in the first 2 years of med school and being with patients. I think it's fun. I think it's fun because you're doing what you want to do for once, right? And you may not like every specialty that you're doing, but it's a chance to learn. I had a great time in my third year rotations. It was stressful at times though. It's busy. You're as a med student, you're like absolute bottom of the food chain because the whole team that the doctor works with that you're with, they don't need you there, but you're still important in your own way, right? Because they will function fine without you, right? They've taken med students, they've not taken med students. So, it's a chance to learn, but also you have to know that the patient is still the priority, right? So you're learning, and it's a privilege for you to kind of experience the interaction with the patient and the doctor and learn from that. And so for some people who may not be adaptable to social situations, it may be tougher for them because it's a real life person coming with a real life problem, and we're expected to get information, and it's not you can't fake empathy. You can't script it. You can't go in with a script to see people. So I think it gives you a chance to work on yourself as a person a lot as well, and kind of figure out, how do I use someone's interactions to guide how I'm interacting with them? Because the last thing you want is for someone to start saying, I don't want to see a med student, right? You don't want to be that person, who ruins the experience for one person for all the later ones down the line.
Yeah. And being a doctor, you don't have hours to spend with the patient. Is there something that you learned or gained, like regarding like emotional intelligence in just having that limited time speaking to
Yeah,
the patient?
it's definitely use the patient's body language, the way they interact with you, let that guide you. If someone, you can tell when a patient is more direct. Some patients like just the facts and they want just, this is what's going on, blah, blah, blah. They don't care for the small talk as much. So, it's more question based, and there'd be times where I'd experience those patients and it's just pretty much me listing off, like, do you have this symptoms, and you don't have this, you've tried this, it's basically just a back and forth, and they're happy with that, and that's what it is. There are other patients who will like to talk, more about their personal life, and you have to kind of, that's where I struggled with, was not cutting people off. And sometimes I would let someone talk too much, and just then to wait for the pause, and the doctor, and I would ask the doctors, I'm like, how do you navigate that? Like, how do you kind of, and some, lots of them will say, oh, you just have to make sure you like cut them off and redirect them. And I think you learn how to do that in your capacity, where how to get over, I don't want to be rude to someone, because at the end of the day, you're there to, see what's going on, figure something out, what's causing someone to be sick, what injury do they have, where are they in their treatment process, and you don't always have the time to hear about what they did for Wednesday on lunch, right? It's emotional intelligence. I'd say that makes a big difference in being, a doctor who understands a patient. And as a medical student, I think you have to be very open-minded, because it's like meeting, you're essentially meeting a new person for the first time, and in that time you have to gain their trust. You have to, get them to like you enough to open up to you. You have to get the answers that you need, all in like, a 15 to 20 minute interaction. So you work on it, but it's not the end of the world if, it takes time to get there. But I'd say definitely having empathy, which, I'd like to say that, it's something that I had going into medical school, is, not being too biased, or, just having, stereotypes towards people that I see, which I think is an issue that some people face, is, bias and things like that. But having empathy helps with that, and really understanding why someone's there helps.
And through your rotations, have you found your specialty that you want to pursue?
Yeah, I really like the OR. So I had a tough surgical rotation in terms of the reputation that it has, the site that I was at. But when I was in the operating room, I loved being there. I knew that I wanted to do something procedural and hands-on from the get-go, and there are ways to do that through medicine, but being in an operating room for 12 to 15 hours, I had more fun than maybe 6 hours in a clinic in an office. For me, you'll find out what really clicks with you in your third year. There were some specialties that I was open-minded to, which when I would be there as a medical student and basically mirror the doctor's life, and you can ask them lots of questions because they're there to be, you have to, I'd say interacting with doctors, you have to kind of gauge what their relationship is with, but it's also your time to learn about each specialty, because it's not like shadowing a doctor in pre-med. I'd say, I don't want to say they're nicer to shadowing students, but they know the students are there to get interest and they're into it. In med school, they'll have a different expectation of you, but you can ask them, what they like about their schedule, what they don't like, what they would do differently, and their lifestyle. And I asked that to almost every, person I was with. And in the OR, as a surgeon, you definitely sacrifice a little bit, than someone that may work in a clinic. But I love the dynamic. I love that you're working with an OR team. You're in a team setting, and it's a bunch of people working towards a common goal. I want to do orthopedic surgery. That's my, I'd say, goal, and that's what I'll be applying for. So I'm excited. I don't, this isn't my interview response. I just think it's the most fun OR. And in the rotations that I've had in it, doing, whatever the surgeon lets me do, I thought was just, I could see myself doing this for 20 to 30 years. That's essentially what it comes down to. It's like you're there to see what you can do for the rest of your life, essentially, until you're in your 60s. Some doctors even their 70s. So, yeah.
And speaking about that, what does your workday look like 20 years from now? Or what would you want it to look like?
20 years from now, so I would like to, I'd essentially hope I'm experienced enough where, I'm not, when you're first starting off and you're, researching every case you do in detail, I'd like to think as a more experienced surgeon, it's a lot more of, I've seen this thing plenty of times to where I know how to do it. So less worry and uncertainty and a lot more confidence with, this is what my day looks like. This is what I have to do. This is and it's just all automatic for me. Okay, I have these cases. This is what I plan to do. This is what I discuss with the patient. And it's very much, everything goes right, minimal complications. I do the surgery I need to do and I come home. I'd like to, because 20 years from now, I'll be in my mid to late 40s. So I'd like to hope that I have a family. I want to have, time with them. I don't want to be someone who's, it's just my life is being in the hospital, or my entire life is just, work. I want to have I want to have plenty of time for family. So I'd hope in 20 years I have that, experience and seniority and, a lifestyle which accommodates for that, which, that's what comes with being an experienced doctor, is you have a little bit more of that say versus, in residency and early on, most of your life is work, which, that's the sacrifice you make in your 20s and sometimes early 30s is, this is basically your life. Med school is your life, majority of your life. Then residency, that's essentially what, you're doing just 24/7. But 20 years from now, I'd like to think I have a better balance and I have time to have fun and do things. And from what I've seen, lots of doctors that I work with, they go on vacations multiple times a year. They still kind of, make it home in time for dinner with their kids. Doesn't sound so bad.
Being in an environment such as a hospital or even clinics, how do you protect your own mental health when you're surrounded by other people suffering or having illnesses?
I think you have to go into this knowing that, not everyone is going to get better on your time, your expected timeline. It's not you can have all the right things going on for a patient, and from what I've experienced in the hospital settings doing like internal medicine and surgery, is someone can need everything that they need to get better, but it can still take time, and they can still be in pain, and they can still be suffering in their own way. You have to divide that from your personal life. I'd say you have to be able to not carry the suffering, the pain, things that you may not like, interactions that you have that you may not have liked at the moment. Separate that from your personal life when you go home, because right, going home is a break from the work that you have to do. And I think the easier that you're able to divide and differentiate that, the better time you can have with not, carrying someone else's pain and suffering back with you. So you have to know that, it's while you're going there to help people, right, and you're learning, and, you could be doing everything right, there's still going to be, pain, suffering, and that's part of the process, unfortunately, is, that you're going to see people in compromised states that, and you can think, what else could I be doing? And sometimes, waiting until you can make the next decision is the best thing to do. But I think most people that I've spoken to, my friends in med school, it's like you realize that going into it. It's not as it's not like a magic instant fix, right? And you'll recognize that once you're in med school and you start experiencing more and more, is that it's not everything has an instant fix. And so being able to kind of divide yourself from the things that go wrong help with kind of keeping yourself going and not get like a whole pessimistic view on it.
Yeah. Has there been like one interaction or one specific case from a patient that just hit you really hard? I'd say there were a few unexpected patients. I'd say unexpected deaths of some patients that, one was it was my second month of third year. So my second rotation of third year. And we saw a patient in the clinic, and he had colon cancer, which was removed, but it had spread to different organs. And he was a young guy. He was like 37, and it spread to a lot of different body organs. He had liver failure, kidney failure. Wasn't doing great, but he came to the office just for a primary care appointment, for a checkup. And the doctor's role is making sure all the specialists are doing their jobs. Is everything being taken care of? Were there any new complaints that he had? And he was relatively okay for the situation, but still not doing well. Like, he was in a lot of chronic pain. He didn't look great, and you'll notice that the appearance of someone who looks sick. You'll see it, and it takes some time. And doctors who are experienced, they will say things like, oh, like, this person looks sick, and it's not the typical like, oh, they're ill or they have an injury. It's they can tell instantly. And so this guy was having some shortness of breath, trouble breathing, chest pains, and we were right across the road from the ER. So our doctor was like, hey, like, can you walk him over there and just let's get him checked out, because he was fine a few days ago and now he's not doing well. So I walk him over to the ER, get him checked in, and then wait for him to go back, and then I go back to the clinic. It's towards the end of the day. And we're talking and everything. The guy's 37. He has some young kids, and we were chatting. It was a normal kind of conversation, minus the fact that he had cancer and has chronic pain. So we go back, finish clinic, decide to go and check in, and in the time, I'd say 2 hours, when you have liver failure, the veins in your throat can essentially get congested and rupture, and you can bleed out from that. And so that happened to this guy. And so when we got there, we found out that happened. He ruptured the veins in his esophagus and passed away. And we were like, what the heck just happened? And I think that kind of stuck with me. And I was asking the doctor, I'm like, what could you have done? And he's like, we
there's nothing we could have done. Like, if anything, we sent him to the ER to get checked out. And then once he got there, they did all the tests required. When they ruptured, he was coughing up blood. So they, took him, assessed him, tried to save him, didn't work. And I think that kind of stuck with me in the sense that, it brings me back to the story of, when that like child when I was in the ER, and you may not be able to save everyone. And I think that was the reality of it is, oh, this guy's coming for a doctor's appointment and we're helping to keep him alive and take care of him. And then something like this happens is, I'd say that, you want to make sure that you as a doctor are doing everything you can for someone, so that they're satisfied. I think the worst feeling a patient could have is, being unsatisfied with a doctor's efforts. They can be unsatisfied with, treatments or care, things that are going on in their life, but I'd say you wouldn't, from what I've experienced, the doctors that really care about the patients that they, see, you can tell the difference between that and a doctor who is just doing it because it's simply their job. And you want to be the one who cares about their patients and who are, doing everything that you can do to help someone, even if it may not work out for the best. Yeah.
How has seeing patients face death changed your life? I know that's something that we just spoke about right now.
Yeah, it hasn't changed. I think the way it's changed things is you learn to accept that it is a frequent and normal part of life, and it's unexpected and expected. It's I was in the surgical ICU 2 months ago, and that's all trauma, and it's unexpected accidents, car crashes, falls, gunshot wounds, stab wounds, things that, someone was functioning at 100% and something happens, and, we had maybe 3 to 4 deaths in that month from traumas alone, some from complications afterwards. And it's a mixed ICU with like medical patients who have medical problems, heart disease, lung disease, things more chronic where their disease, had just got to the point where it was their time. So, accidents causing death versus things where it's going to happen, it's a matter of time. But I don't think, I think, understanding that death, it happens, and you can do everything that you can and it can still happen, that's basically the acceptance of it. And it's, being a doctor, no doctor wants any of their patients to die, and I think that's what you'll see is, there's lots of these experienced, surgeons, hospitalists, anesthesiologists, every like, GI docs, lung doctors, critical care docs, like they're some of the most intelligent people you'll see when things aren't going well, and they know what to do in an instant. And you as a student, or you'll see something going on, someone will be coding or they'll have a heart attack, and you'll be thinking of the things you've learned, and these doctors know what to do instantly, and it still may not be enough. So it's knowing that it's, death is gonna happen, and we can't always avoid it, and it's you're going into a field that you can choose how much of it you directly experience, right? Like if you aren't comfortable with it, you might be able to, choose something else that you don't have to, like, I don't want to say in every field it's free of it, right? Because you see a patient and things may happen, but there are certain specialties where you may not be directly involved with it. And I think, it's not, you don't have to be, saving someone's life. You can be improving someone's life as a doctor, and that's just important. That's just important. It doesn't all have to be about saving someone all the time. It could be, I want to do orthopedic surgery, and a lot of the time, it's not, life threatening injuries, but you're still improving someone's quality of life. But, in residency for orthopedics, a lot of what you see could be trauma related, and it could be, where you have to amputate someone's limb, which I saw once, or, it could be something as, won't get better, but you have to do the best you can do versus, in in someone, in dermatology, you may not directly face death, and you're improving someone's quality of life. You're saving people from, skin cancer or preventing skin cancer, and if other things like GI, where you're doing preventative screenings for things, and you're still improving someone's quality of life if they have like irritable bowel disease or something like that, where you may not directly face death, but it's still possible. It's just kind of where on the scale you're comfortable with it. And that's what the rotations help with. Some people just really don't want to be in any field where there's a risk of death from their hands or like actions.
Living and seeing all of this, what's something that you would want to change about the medical system, whether it's hospitals, hierarchy of it all, or like insurance?
Yeah, I'd say it's what I've experienced, as a student, seeing how things work, and I've been lucky where I've been working with doctors in hospitals and clinics and, private practices where the doctor owns the practice versus practices where they're part of a group that maybe a private equity firm owns them, and, hospital employee, doctors and surgeons. The one core thing is how it's a bit annoying that insurance really dictates care, and I think you could see more patients and do more if there was more time. And I don't think the time comes from the lack of time that people are like, oh, my doctor doesn't see me for enough. It's because, we have to, like, not we, but the doctors, including the students, you have to go in someone's chart and see what things have they done before coming to see you. Because suppose there was a test that they did that maybe you didn't see, insurance won't cover it. If you repeat it, like even a simple blood test, you have to make sure you see what they've done before coming to see you. It could be a scan, maybe there was an MRI that they did before seeing you that isn't in the records, and you order it again, and now the patient's like, why am I paying $2,000 for an MRI? I just did one, you didn't, something slipped through, then you have to see a patient and get all the information from them, and then afterwards you have to do all documentation for insurance for them to cover the things that you want to do now, instead of just doctors being able to see people, give them the time they need, and be like, oh, I think you need this. But then, I was just working with a spine surgeon last month, and a lot of his patients that needed surgery from his, perspective, we would have to say, oh, but you have to do 6 weeks of physical therapy, and then you have to try these injections from this specialist, and if you fail all of that, then we can do the surgery. But I know you need it anyway, so let's just spend 3 to 6 months doing all that because insurance wants it, because they won't cover your surgery otherwise. I think, I think anyone going into medicine, you have to understand it's not the same as, when lots of these older doctors who are, I'd say maybe like 50 plus, when they were first practicing, I don't think those limitations were as apparent. And if anything, there are some that I've worked with who are in their 60s and 70s who complain about that, because they used to just be able to see someone, say, this is what you need, and they would get it, for a very manageable cost. And I think going from insurance, you also see inequity in access to healthcare is very different based on where you go, and certain people can't afford certain treatments, that another person might not think twice about. So I think seeing that, it may cause it's not the most comfortable thing to think about, but you're going into a system that is, you'll hear it a lot, and if you look it up online, you'll hear about it about like physician autonomy, where even though you're a doctor and you're at the top of your field, you still will be dictated by other systems and other people into what you can do, so you're not making your own decisions that you may necessarily want at the moment. So I think it's just understanding that's just how it is. You know, you're not going to the perfect world where you can just be like, oh, you need this medicine, go get it. It's like, oh, you have to try these 3 first and fail them all, and then we'll get you this medicine.
And is there no way around that? Like living in the United States, like
I mean, unfortunately not. Like, it's and I've been trying to do some like reading into, you know, what's a workaround, or like, you know, beating the system. You know, if you're a lot of times there are incentives. So if you're a doctor who works for a certain company or a hospital, there's an incentive to, you know, get this many tests done because it brings money into the hospital, right? So one workaround is, you know, have your own practice. That way you can do more of what you want and you're not governed by like, oh, you didn't order this many scans, or you didn't do this many surgeries or this many procedures, you know, in this month. There's also, you know, I'd say if you own your own practice, you have a little bit more of a dependence of like the patient volume. Some doctors, you know, are required, like if they work for private equity companies, you know, they're like, oh, like you have to see 40 patients a day to bring in this much money. If, you know, and that's where, you know, you may not be spending too much time with the patient as you'd like. So owning your own practice or working for, it's like a physician-owned practice where it's, you know, you and a bunch of colleagues who own that practice, you get to dictate that a bit more, because you can be like, oh, like I actually want to spend half an hour with each patient. You can make your own schedule like that. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to doing things for patients, insurance covers things. So unless there's a way of, you know, unless people can afford it, really, that's what it comes down to. You know, it's can someone afford something without insurance, which is, you know, that's the whole debate. And that's where lots of people argue about universal health care. And like, you know, I think it has pros and cons. One of the cons being, if you ask someone who lives in a country with universal health care, they're waiting like a year for a CT scan, you know? So it's pros and cons to everything.
yeah.
But that's, you know, that's one thing about, if you're pre-med and you're thinking of everything as an ideal situation, it's the reality is, you know, that's when they say the system is broken. You know, there are lots of barriers to patients and the doctors, you know, and lots of people will blame doctors, but also they're doing what they can in their capacity, you know, so it may not, you know, like one of the common misconceptions is like pharmaceutical companies pay doctors to use their medications, things like that. That's actually illegal. And it's been illegal for a little while now for them to get any sort of compensation. So it's, you know, they're not pushing certain drugs or things like that. It's a lot of, you know, that's what's available to use, you know, and they have to lots of times go through a list of things before insurance will cover what they want. So, you know, I think public education also plays a part in it, and that's what the US lacks a lot of, is, you know, like with social media and, you know, different, you know, non-medical podcasts and people doing their own research. You know, a lot of people also may not just know about how the system works, and I think that also kind of helping with public education and public health can help them understand how the system works. But it's, you know, that's why it's a whole systemic issue. It's not just the doctors, you know, it's a bunch of different things and a bunch of different entities that basically cause inefficiencies. You know, it's you're not going into, like, I'd say you're not going into a perfect field. There's a lot of barriers in it, but you can be the best that you can be as a doctor, and, you know, help the patient as best as you can. Because at the end of the day, someone's coming to see you because they're not doing well. So you have to, you know, how can you help them fix their issue, but also how can you help them feel like heard? And that's where you have to be empathetic. I'd say you, like, every like, I'd like to hope that I'll be a great surgeon, but also you'd like to hope every surgeon is a great surgeon, right? Like, I'd like to think that if, you know, if I wanted to get a certain knee surgery done, you know, I can refer someone, suppose a family member. You can't do, you know, it's discouraged. I think it's illegal for you to do surgeries on family members. I'd like to think that I would have, like, you know, in the orthopedic realm one day, a bunch of options for a family member, but it comes down to which ones you want to be remembered as a kind doctor that listens to a patient, not just those ones that's like, here's what's wrong with you, here's what I'm going to do. And, you know, lots of people don't have medical knowledge, so they just blindly follow. You know, I think it's good to ask your doctor questions, but also you want to be the doctor who people trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and going into that, if you could only be remembered for one thing as a doctor, what would it be?
I think it would be my kindness, and I think I would want my patients to see me as a good person who has their best interest in mind. Because like I said, you know, I'd like to hope that I'll be a great surgeon and that my work will speak for itself. But, you know, following that, I want to be someone that, you know, patients can be, you know, oh, Zaamin is a really good guy. You know, like he's a good person. He cares about his patients. He's kind to them. He listens to them. That's what I want to be known for. You know, besides being a really, really good surgeon, I want to be known for, you know, this is the type of person that I would trust my kids or spouse or, you know, grandparents or family members seeing. Yeah.
And the last question, what would be your message to yourself after residency? So around 4 years from now.
I'd say the message is, one of the messages would be like, do you still have hair? Like, do I have to book a trip to Turkey or not? I would like to think, I would like to tell myself, or I'd like to hear, you know, you haven't changed for worse, you've only become better. You know, I'd like to think that current me would be proud of, you know, future attending orthopedic surgeon me in terms of how I am with people and how I interact and how I am as a mentor to those, you know, under me and with less experience and how I am to my peers. I'd like to think that the way that I visualize myself wanting to be is the person that I've become.
And that's all. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you for coming
Thank
on,
you so
Zaamin.
much.
We gained a
It's
lot
good
of
being
great
here.
insight. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.